let's deal very specifically, first of all, with what precisely the very word guru itself means. I think if we have a little bit of clarification of some of these terms, this will help quite a bit in understanding what is the nature of guru. First of all, the word guru itself is actually a pretty generic term. It simply means teacher. And it doesn't necessarily mean just a spiritual teacher per se. Certainly every spiritual teacher is a guru, but not every guru is a spiritual teacher. Okay, if that makes sense. In actuality, anyone who teaches you any subject is a guru. So traditionally in Hinduism, if you want to study, for example, music, if you want to study the sitar or Bharatanatyam dance or anything like this, you have a guru, you have a teacher who you go to. Now this person is not necessarily going to be someone who's going to lead you to enlightenment. In fact, that's not necessarily their job description at all. Rather, they're meant to teach you a very specific sort of topic. Now, narrowing it in a little bit more, again, there are certain individuals for who, when the term guru is applied to them, it is meant very specifically that they are a spiritual teacher, as opposed to a teacher of a more, let's say, secular sort of subject. Now, when it comes to even these sorts of gurus, there are many different levels in which an individual can be considered a guru. Not all gurus are equal in any way, shape, or form. Not all gurus are necessarily even enlightened, interestingly. The best are, but it's not necessarily the case that they are. Thus, we come to our first distinction, that of guru versus satguru. Satguru, sometimes spelled S-A-T, sometimes S-A-D, depending on the grammar. What that means very simply is true guru. The term sat can mean true or real. So this is the true guru versus a guru who is guru in form only. Okay? What is meant by a satguru is very specifically an individual who can bring one to enlightenment. And it is the understanding that that person also is enlightened. Okay? Now, I want to stop there for 1 second and discuss the very important topic of what precisely that means for an individual to be enlightened. Because if we're going to understand what an enlightened guru is, we have to understand what's meant by enlightenment. This is a word which, again, like so many words in the spiritual community, spiritual world, it's one of these words that's just kind of thrown around willy-nilly without really much of a proper understanding of what the term actually means. First, what the term does not mean. The term does not mean an individual who has achieved absolute perfection in everything they do and every step that they take. Okay? To know this, all we have to do is look at enlightened beings of the past. And what we see is that while they are beings who have achieved oneness with the divine on the one hand, on the other hand, it's not that they've then lost their body. They still have imperfections, they still get ill, they still need sleep, food, all these different things. Now, what is enlightenment very specifically? Very simply, what enlightenment is that point in a person's spiritual development where that person ceases to function as a result of ego and is functioning now purely as a result of their realization of self and their realization of God. Very simply, if I had to state it in a small nutshell version, that is enlightenment. Okay? Now, with this understanding in mind, again, the proper guru is an individual who is functioning on such a level. Okay, that is the Sadguru. Now, let us back up a little bit and talk about, before we go much deeper into what is the nature specifically of the guru, what the guru looks like, etc. Let's talk about why there is even a necessity for guru. Because in the modern world especially, even that has become a somewhat prevalent question, to the point where I'll sometimes hear people say things to the effect of, oh, well, I'm my own guru, or I don't need a guru, or such and such historical figure who lived 10,000 years ago, well, that person is my guru. You hear all sorts of attempts to practice spiritual life without the benefit of guru. So let's first talk about what is the importance of guru. First, within the context of Hinduism, and really truthfully, not just in Hinduism, but in the context of learning anything really, but especially let's focus on Hinduism. Within the context of Hinduism, having a guru is crucial, and there's no way around this. Every single tradition of Hinduism conceivable stresses the importance of guru, and there is no tradition that does not. Now, why is this the case? Why is it important to have a guru in order to achieve enlightenment? And in fact, I would actually go further, and many people would, and say that it is actually impossible to achieve enlightenment without the guru. And that might seem like a foreign concept to some, but let me explain why this is indeed the case. What it means to eventually achieve enlightenment is that, first of all, the necessary prerequisite for achieving enlightenment is that one is on a spiritual path toward enlightenment. Okay? When we are on that spiritual path, for however long it takes us, years, many years, lifetimes, however long it is, what are we doing? What are we doing in that spiritual path? We are clarifying who and what we are, little by little. We are ridding ourselves of illusion, ridding ourselves of what are called anarthas, or all sorts of internal moral and perceptual faults that we may have. And then positively, we are coming to a deeper and deeper realization of true self. Now, understanding this, in order to achieve this sort of steady progress without the benefit of guru is a complete impossibility. This is the reason why. If we make the claim that, well, I'll just be my own guru, I'll just be my own judge as far as what sort of progress I'm making, whether I'm doing the right thing, whether I should be pursuing this course as opposed to that course, whether I should be doing this particular practice more or less, etc., etc. All of these many decisions that we come across as we're on our path. If we say that, well, I'm just my own guru and my own judge, this is the problem. We lie to ourselves. That's the problem. In other words, as we're making spiritual progress, ego is still operative. So, if we are our own guru, there's this saying, what's the saying in law, that if you choose to represent yourself in a court case, you have a fool for a client. Well, in the same way, if you choose to say, oh, I am my own guru, well, you have a fool for a disciple. And again, the reason why is because we have the ability through ego to lie to ourselves. Very often, possibly we will make a little bit of progress, but then we will allow our ego to run away with this. For myself, having been working in the Hindu context for many years, I've seen this with hundreds of people, hundreds of individuals who will know absolutely nothing about Hinduism. Maybe they'll start reading a Bhagavad Gita. Then 6 months later, they'll be in some meditation and they'll have some profound experience, and then right then and there, they're convinced they're an enlightened being. And they themselves start acting as if they're a guru. Again, I've seen hundreds of individuals who will fall into this trap. And what ends up happening, of course, is that, well, they're lying to themselves, they're lying to whoever they then attempt to teach, and it ends up being a disaster. Now, if that individual had had proper training, and training under the auspices of an individual who has been on the path for maybe decades, then that guru would have told the person, no, it's wonderful that you had one very profound experience. However, one profound experience is not enough. To have profound experiences on the spiritual path every so often is a very normal thing. However, if you let that get to your head and now think to yourself, oh, now I'm an enlightened being and I'm ready to start teaching others, then in actuality you're only cheating yourself and those others who you're trying to teach. So in other words, we need someone outside of ourselves to steer us in the right direction. This is why when we're children we have parents. This is why when we want to go to graduate school, medical school, any learning context like this, we have to have an actual living teacher outside of ourselves who can correct us. Because self-correction is it's a near impossibility all of the time. We can sometimes correct ourselves, but truthfully, to expect ourselves to have the ability to always correct ourselves when necessary is almost a complete impossibility. Thus, we need that individual who serves as the Sadguru, as the true teacher outside of ourselves. Now, having said this, let's talk about, again, what is the nature of this person, this individual who is situated outside of ourselves as guru. First, there are certain criteria that a person needs to fulfill if a person claims to be a guru. Let me be absolutely blunt and honest with everyone who's here, and people who know me know I have a reputation for being very honest when it comes even to my own religion. I've been practicing Hinduism for 33 years. I'm also the greatest critiquer of Hinduism as well. I would say, without exaggeration whatsoever, probably 90% of individuals within Hinduism who call themselves gurus are not. And that's being very conservative. 90%. That means of 10 individuals who you can go to YouTube and see their nice little satsang video, or you can go to Barnes & Noble, pick up their book, or you can go to India and visit their ashram, of 10, 9 will be fake. And 1 will be real. And that's being conservative. And how do I know this? I've met them. Many of them face to face. And I've spoken to them face to face. And they do not fit the criteria for what is a guru. Now let's talk about what is that criteria. And the criteria is no mystery. The criteria is there in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna very clearly gives he gives lists of attributive features that an individual who is enlightened must have. And if they do not have those, Krishna is quite clear, they are not enlightened. Also within the Upanishads, in many of the scriptures, there are literally lists of criteria that a person must have if they claim to be guru. So it's not a mystery. So let's talk about just a small number of these criteria, what are probably the most important ones. First of all, and I'll deal with this in a very logical, sequential sort of way. First of all, a guru has to, of course, have knowledge. That's number one. That may seem kind of seem like something rather obvious. However, you'd be shocked at how many people there are who call themselves gurus, who, if you were to ask them a serious question, not a fluffy question, but a serious philosophical question about Vedanta, they wouldn't even be able to answer you. And again, I've met these people myself, gurus in nice flowing robes, who I'll ask them a very distinct question about epistemology and what are the proper pramanas that Shankaracharya versus Ramanuja sets out in their commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, and they'll just kind of look at me like, what? So number one, they have to actually have knowledge. And what is meant by knowledge? What is meant by knowledge is they need to know the scriptures extremely well. By very definition, a guru is someone who understands Shastra, or the scriptures of Hinduism. If they do not know the scriptures of Hinduism, if they themselves have not just glanced by, not just have a few verses memorized, but if they have not studied the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, if they have not studied the basic philosophical foundations of Hinduism and thus have that knowledge, they're not a guru. It's not enough merely to be a nice, charismatic person who goes around the world hugging people. You have to have knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot claim to be a guru, which means a teacher, very specifically. You can call yourself something else, but by definition, you are not a teacher, because a teacher has knowledge. Number two, the guru has to have the ability to communicate that knowledge. Now, while those two might seem to be the same thing, they're not. A person can have knowledge, but not necessarily be able to communicate it. In fact, how many people here maybe have been in a college program, college class, or graduate school, or someplace where you have a professor who is supposed to be a renowned authority on a specific subject, but they can't teach if their life depended on it. They don't know how to communicate that, in other words. Well, a guru has to be able to have that ability to communicate, and to communicate in a very clear, very systematic sort of way. Okay? The next criteria for a guru is, and this may seem obvious, but to some gurus it's not, a guru has to be a moral and ethical individual. Okay? Very important. In other words, a guru has to uphold an infinitely higher standard of morality than their students. And if a guru is not a moral person and tries to give all sorts of excuses, oh, why did I sleep with all of my disciples? Oh, I was just practicing Tantra, which many gurus have done. Many gurus have attempted that, or, oh, I'm so enlightened, I've gone beyond morality, beyond good and evil. No, no, no. When you become enlightened, you personify goodness. That's how you do go beyond good and evil, in that all that there is in you is good. So, and I've heard gurus also try to say this, oh, I'm what's called an avadhuta, someone who has transcended morality. Yes, you can transcend morality, but what that actually looks like is an individual who follows morality effortlessly. Not that oh, I've transcended morality, therefore everything that I do is going to be bad. No, it's actually on the contrary. I've transcended human morality, therefore there is nothing but goodness in me, divine goodness. Okay? So a guru has to be an ethical person. A guru has to have humility. And this is something that you'll hear me repeat very often, not just for the guru, but certainly for any individual who claims to be either on a spiritual path, what to speak of enlightened. A guru has absolute humility. They're not someone who goes on and on about their own enlightenment. Again, this is something else I've encountered all too often. Individuals who will give an entire lecture talking about their own enlightenment, and oh, I am so enlightened, and this is when I became enlightened, and this is what it's like to be enlightened, and oh, all you poor people should listen to me because you're not enlightened, but I am. That is not a guru, anyone who talks in such a way. More, let's go a little bit further. And this may be for some, but really shouldn't be in any way a controversial statement. A guru does not at any point in their life either themselves claim or allow their disciples to claim that they are God. The moment that a guru claims that they are God or allows their disciples to claim that they are God, they are abusing their role as guru. Very important. Today, it's almost, unfortunately, a cottage industry. It seems that every guru who comes to America, almost by default, they have to be an incarnation of someone. Oh, I am an incarnation of the Divine Mother. I'm an incarnation of this, of that. To the point where we have to think that today we are either the most blessed people in the history of humanity because every single guru is an incarnation of somebody, or else we're the most cursed people in history, because every guru is a liar. No, a guru does not claim to be an incarnation of such and such. Again, this is something the scriptures are quite clear about. There are not going to be any incarnations for at least another 400 and I believe 24,000 years. Period. The next incarnation is Kalki, and nowhere in the scriptures are any other incarnations in this age predicted. And anyone who claims that they are an incarnation of God is quite literally lying about this. Rather, a guru, again, has to be someone who has radical humility. And you have to have the ability to see that in them immediately. Next, the guru is an individual who personifies what they teach. And this is meant in several ways. First, the guru is an individual who practices, both practices what it is that they tell their disciples to do. That's the first thing. But second, they also manifest the fruits of that practice. Okay? So in other words, if the guru says, oh, if you practice my mantra, you'll have A, B, C, and D effects. But then if you see that the guru doesn't have A, B, C, and D effects, well, there's a disconnect. That's there. There's something wrong there. More, going a little bit deeper into this, what is also meant by the guru manifesting what they're actually teaching, they also teach by their very example, not merely by what they say. And this is also something that's of great importance. Let's take that a little bit deeper, and actually this leads to the next criteria. This leads very nicely to the next criteria. And that is, the guru is an individual who not only has the ability to teach, but the guru actually serves a much deeper metaphysical function than simply being a teacher. You know, when we think of guru, we tend to think of guru primarily in this sense, as someone who literally instructs us or guides us. That definitely is an extremely important aspect of what the guru is, but there is a deeper aspect, and that is that the guru, because they are an individual who, again, should be manifesting the divine in everything that they do, they also have the ability to affect their disciples, to affect their students, not just verbally, not just intellectually, but in a much deeper sort of way. They have the ability to transmit what is called Shakti Da. Shakti means energy, and Da means to give. Shakti Da is a word, compound word that means empowerment. The guru has the ability to quite literally empower the disciple. And this is done both when the process of initiation takes place, when mantra is first given to the disciple. That in itself is a direct empowerment. But more, an open individual, a person who is open to spiritual transformation, should be able to actually begin to feel spiritual transformation in their own personal life, even just being in the presence of the guru. You know? And for some, this may sound like magical thinking, but it's something that's quite real. You know, I'll give you the example of myself with my guru. You know, my guru was absolutely an enlightened being. His name was Bhakti Rakshaka Sridhar Swami. And he certainly would give talks, he would give lectures, even though he was in his early 90s. When I first met him, he could talk for 2 hours. You know, if you asked him a question, he could answer you easily for 2 hours. On the other hand, there would be times when he wouldn't speak. And frankly, that would be just as empowering as when he did speak. Simply being in the presence of an individual who is quite literally a window to the divine has such a powerful effect upon the individual that even if the person is just sitting there, and very often I would have this experience with my own guru, that he would just literally just be sitting, you know, and he would be, sometimes he would just be absolutely absorbed in God. You know, he would just be sitting there. Sometimes he wouldn't even be aware of the presence of other people, you know, and you would just hear him once in a while, you know, just say the names of God. You know, he would just literally be in absorption. And every so often he would just say something like, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. And he would just be literally absorbed in God. And even at times like that, even though he wouldn't be giving an official lecture, it was even more powerful, just being there with him. Because there would be a transmission of divinity, being in the presence of a person who, at that moment, is literally absorbed in God. You can imagine the power of this. You can imagine the power of this. You know, just being in that presence, it's literally like, you know, being cold and suddenly there is a nice little campfire in front of you and you're in the presence of that warmth. You know, the wonderful feeling that it gives you. So the guru has the ability to transmit experience, and sometimes even non-verbally. Okay? Now, again, these are only a few of the criteria. There are many other criteria. Again, they're just listed in many places. The guru has to be an individual, for example, who has equanimity. You know, the person has to have peace. The person has to have samadarshinaha, which is one of my favorite terms that's found in the Bhagavad Gita specifically. Krishna says that the true sage has samadarshinaha. They have equal vision toward all beings. Now, let me explain what I mean by equal vision. Not in a, you know, more modern sort of egalitarian sort of sense, but equal vision meaning that even though the enlightened being can look around them and they see, okay, woman body, male body, you know, black, white, Indian, you know, dog, cat, human, they see the bodies, and the bodies are not equal. The bodies are all different. However, the enlightened being sees beyond the bodies, and that's where the samadarshinaha is. That's where the equal vision is. the enlightened being has the ability to look around them, see all these living beings, and realize, no, they're all Atman. They're all soul. They're all consciousness. They're all my brothers and sisters. You know? So that's another important quality that the Guru has to have. Now, we can go on talking about the qualities of Guru. Let's actually reverse this, talk a little bit about the qualities of the disciple, because this is also something that's very important, which is even more rarely spoken about, actually, than the qualities of Guru. Because in the same way that the Guru has to fulfill certain prerequisites before you can say, okay, this person is a proper Guru and has the ability to be Guru. In the same way, an individual who approaches the Guru has to fulfill certain requirements. So let's talk about that a little bit. An individual who wants to approach a Guru in order to be that Guru's student has to fulfill the following requirements and have the following characteristics. And again, I'm just going to focus on the most important of them. The person, first of all, has to have sincerity. That's certainly something that's kind of a given. Sincerity, meaning that they know what it is that they want to achieve, and they want to achieve that for the right reasons. Okay? Let me stop right there for a second. Not everyone who is on the spiritual path, just speaking very generally, is on a spiritual path for the right reasons. People come to the spiritual enterprise for many, many different reasons and with many different goals in mind. You know, some people come to a spiritual path really seeking just comfort because, you know, they've had a bad life or something, or they've had some traumas that have occurred in their life, and they simply want something that will give them some assurance that life is okay. You know, some individuals will come to the spiritual path seeking healing. And today in America, especially, I can tell you in the last 30 years, I would say that's why probably the vast majority of people begin spiritual life is that they're seeking some sort of personal healing because of something that's happened in their life. They had a bad relationship with their parents, or they experienced abuse, or they are in recovery from some sort of addiction, or they've had some sort of trauma happen to them. So as a result, they're seeking healing. Some individuals come to spiritual life because they're merely curious. They have kind of an intellectual curiosity, and in some cases they can go beyond merely the intellectual curiosity. In some cases they can't. Some individuals come to spiritual life for actually very bad reasons. They come to spiritual life because they see it as something that can give them power in one way or another, you know. And there is power that's there. Individuals who become spiritual do tend to become people who are more charismatic, people who are more together in their life, people who, you know, seem to have some sort of power to them. And unfortunately, individuals who focus only on these externals without understanding that those are all just a byproduct of something much deeper, you know, they'll focus only on those externals. And they'll think to themselves, oh, well, gee, you know, obviously being a spiritual person, you know, gives you some sort of power, and I want power. So therefore, let me be a quote-unquote spiritual person. Whereas in actuality, they're missing the entire point of spirituality. And then, finally, there are people who come to the spiritual path for the right reason, and that is to know and embrace truth. To know and embrace truth. These are the individuals who are approaching spirituality sincerely. Because really the only reason to be on a spiritual path should be to know truth. Should be to not only know truth intellectually, but to quite literally embrace and manifest truth in our own life. That's the reason why we start a spiritual path in any way. Second very important criteria is, again, humility. Not only does there have to be humility on the part of the Guru, but also on the part of the student as well. And let me explain for a second what precisely I mean by humility. Because even when it comes to the term humility, there tend to be some misconceptions and stereotypes. Humility does not mean allowing ourselves to be abused. It doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean having a negative self-image. No, on the contrary, actually. True humility is actually a balanced approach in such a way that, on the one hand, we are very comfortable with ourselves. We're comfortable with who we are. We're happy with who we are. But on the other hand, we are realistic about our limitations. Very simple. We are realistic about our limitations. That's humility. That, again, just because we make a little bit of spiritual progress, we don't then think that somehow we no longer have limitations. And again, now I'm this enlightened being. No, we understand that we still have limitations. We still have a long way to go, etc. So humility is a very important prerequisite. Openness. Openness is something that is very important on the part of the student. And by openness, what I mean is, what is it that a person on the spiritual path is trying to achieve? They're trying to transform themselves for the better, correct? You can't do that if you're not open to change. You need to be open to change. You need to be open to instruction. You need to be open to guidance. And more, you need to be open to experience. Because the truth is, as we make spiritual progress, we're going to be experiencing states that we have never experienced before. And one thing that my guru would say all the time is, progress means elimination and new acceptance. So in other words, there are ideas, there are ways of thinking, there are experiences that we're holding on to now that we're going to have to let go of. That's progress. And then, conversely, there are new things that we've never experienced before that we will have to now adopt. And again, everything from actual experiences to ideas, worldviews, etc. So the person who wants to be on the spiritual path has to be very open to this. Okay. Next, the student has to have tremendous yearning to make spiritual progress. And this is something that is crucial. If we want to achieve anything in life that is of importance, any large thing, if we don't have a passion for it, we're not going to achieve it. If we don't have a desire, a yearning to achieve that thing, we're not going to achieve it. Ask anyone who's been to medical school, ask anyone who has gotten a PhD, anyone who, again, has acquired any sort of very difficult degree to achieve. Ask anyone who has become a billionaire. Ask anyone who has started a company. Ask anyone who has achieved any large thing, and you'll know that if they approached what they were doing half-heartedly, they would not have been successful. If you go to medical school and you're kind of half-hearted and you don't have a yearning and a desire, if you're just kind of there because, I just don't really know what else to do with my life, so let me try medical school, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. In the same way, frankly, going to medical school, getting a PhD, becoming a billionaire, starting an empire is easy and meaningless compared to making spiritual progress. So it is especially if we want to know ourselves and if we want to know God that we have to have a yearning for that, unlike the yearning that we have for anything else in our lives. It has to be, in the forefront of everything that we want to do. And of course, that depends on how much progress we want to make. We will make progress in accordance with our yearning, And this is why people are on different stages. This is why when we look around us, spiritually speaking, you'll see some people who seemingly are very advanced. You'll see some people who barely have even begun. You'll see all sorts of people who are intermediate. The reason why you see such diversity is because, again, it all depends upon our individual yearning, how much we want to know truth, to know God, to know self, And in accordance with how much we want that, we are given that. And more, this is a fact, an idea that is in conjunction with the notion of free will. Of our own free will, we have to have the ability, we have to have the desire to know truth. You know, God never forces that desire upon us. On the contrary, that desire is something that springs, that arises from our free will. So when, of our own free will, we finally say to ourselves, you know, I want to actually transform my life in a positive spiritual sort of way, then it's at that point that in direct proportion to how much we want that, we will have that. Okay? Let's see, just a few more very quick criteria for a student. They have to have the ability to learn. Very important. You know, in other words, you know, in order for an individual to be a student in any context, you have to have a certain minimum amount of intelligence, you know, and the ability to learn. Again, that's true even if you're just going to school, even if you're going to graduate school or anything. In the same way, if you want to make spiritual progress, it does definitely help to be somewhat philosophically oriented, you know, because to attempt to know God without the aid of some philosophy is impossible, you know.
How do you find a guru and how you get, I guess, that initiation process going? I mean, is there like a acceptance between both parts, or how does that work?
You need to, of course, be very careful. You need to take your time. You need to find that person who you're very, very comfortable with. The person certainly has to fit all the criteria, you know, that we mentioned, among other criteria. Once you find that person, then yes, there's an examination on both sides, actually. The guru is not someone who is overly eager to accept disciples who are not ready to be disciples, on the one hand, but then on the other, yes, the disciple has to be, you know, very careful in taking initiation from that guru. They want to make sure that the person is not only the real thing, but actually right for them as well. Because you may even find someone who is indeed truly a guru, but who you for some reason don't necessarily kind of click with, you know. So you want to make sure that that's the case. And then once both parties agree that yes, this can be a proper guru-shishya, you know, teacher-student relationship, then the process of diksha or initiation takes place. You know, with initiation, several things are done. First, that's the beginning of the formal relationship, you know, of guru and shishya. But also, it's especially there that the beginning of spiritual life in a systematic way is signaled. You know, so in other words, certainly anyone at any point in almost any context can make spiritual progress. But as far as making spiritual progress in a systematic, guided sort of way, that begins at the time of initiation. You know, it's kind of like, can anyone pick up a book on medicine and start reading it? Sure, you can, but you're not in medical school. You know, once you enter medical school, then your education has formally begun, because now you're doing it in a systematic, authorized sort of way. So in the same way, anyone can certainly begin to make spiritual progress. But really, formally, you know, the systematic path of spiritual progress begins at initiation.